Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on call center best practices. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I'll pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast typically lasts about 90 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the call center, service desk, and desktop support benchmarks and assessments for MetricNet. The work we do for call centers worldwide spans the gambit, from benchmarking to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the call centers that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. For those who've not been to our website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our online content. This includes our Metric of the Month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you'll be enrolled as a free premium member. And then each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library and access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to conduct a benchmark comes up in every webcast, I'll preempt the question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are 4 ways you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. We're showing 3 of them on this page. 1 will be on the next page. First, there are peer group benchmarks that compare you and measure your call center, service desk, or desktop support function to a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. Secondly, if you are only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button on the upper navigation bar, and you'll see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. Now, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Finally, for those interested in a continuous improvement initiative, MetricNet earlier this year launched its 1-year path to world-class performance. This program starts with a benchmark and an ROI calculation of your call center. Following that is a 6 to 9 month improvement phase with MetricNet as your coach and guide. The program concludes with a second benchmark and ROI calculation approximately 1 year after the initial benchmark to objectively measure the progress that's been made and to definitively show that your call center has indeed achieved world-class performance. Now, regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of call center and service desk professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. Now, for those who would like to follow us on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate in the webcast, share your thoughts, key points, ask questions, or just follow along. And one final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. The survey provides us with valuable feedback. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I've got 4 things on our agenda today. We're going to start with what I call the customer contact imperative. What I want to do is establish a strategic context for our discussion today. We're going to talk briefly about what I call the research methodology. It sounds boring, but I think it's important to spend just a few minutes talking about the origins of MetricNet's call center best practices model. It's very empirical in nature. There's nothing academic or theoretical about what you're hearing today. Everything that is presented is based upon our observations, having completed more than 3,000 benchmarks since the company was started. We're very quickly, though, going to move into our model for industry best practices, which involves performance measurement, diagnosis using benchmarking, prescription, which is action planning, and then implementation to continuously improve the performance of your call center. Finally, I'm going to wrap up with a call to action, an opportunity to excel and provide some insight, give you some pointers, if you will, for how you can take advantage of today's insights and see nearly immediate improvement in your call center performance. So let's go ahead and get started with the customer contact imperative. Now, if you've been in the workforce for any period of time at all, you know that competition is constantly increasing in every industry, in every vertical market. Things never get easier. They only get more difficult. That is because competitors are trying to achieve superiority. They're trying to build a competitive advantage. We've got things like industry consolidation, regulatory scrutiny, virtual businesses that are popping up that don't have any brick and mortar facilities. Customers expect one-stop shopping when they call a contact center. There's, of course, shareholder pressure from shareholders who want their piece of the earnings pie. And everyone I know that works in this industry operates under budgetary constraints. No one has enough resources. We hear that day in and day out. And at the same time, your customers are increasingly demanding, and customers have greater choice and leverage over you as a supplier. Now, in the midst of all of this, companies are beginning to discover or perhaps rediscover that there's still an opportunity to build a competitive advantage at the customer interface. So there's a growing importance at the customer contact interface, and specifically at contact centers, whether those are live voice contact centers, web-based contact centers, chat contact centers, whatever they might be. Organizations are beginning to discover and rediscover that there's an opportunity here to build a competitive advantage at the customer interface. Now, over the course of a year, there are 8,760 hours. You can run the math. 365 hours times 24 hours gets you to about 9,000 hours per year. Yet when you think about the amount of time that you have direct contact with some of your providers as a consumer, for example, calling your retail bank, calling your credit card company, calling your insurance company, calling your gas or electric utility, on average, you spend about anywhere from 7 to 22 minutes per year on the phone with those providers. Think about that. You're expecting nearly 9,000 hours of nonstop, uninterrupted, 24/7 service, yet you're only speaking to those suppliers, whether it's a mortgage, the mortgage holder, credit card company, a retail bank, or anyone else. You're only speaking to them anywhere from 7 to 22 minutes per year. Talk about a source of leverage. Talk about a moment of truth opportunity. This really does represent an opportunity to either build customer value or destroy customer value, to increase customer loyalty or decrease customer loyalty, to establish a competitive advantage or fritter away a competitive advantage. But make no mistake about it, this is a critical interface, and it's a high leverage interface. It represents a window of opportunity for companies and organizations that are smart enough to exploit it to build a competitive advantage. Now, as a result, what has emerged over the last 3 to 5 years is a very different paradigm, if you will, a very different mindset about what a contact center can and should be. Now, let's talk first about the old paradigm of the call center. It was viewed as a support function. We even had customers refer to their call centers as a necessary evil. They were often considered supplemental to brick and mortar facilities. So typically, if you wanted to do something at the bank, you'd go to your local branch, you'd walk in and you'd deal directly with the teller. So the call center was considered supplemental to that. But many cases, what we found was that call centers were playing catch up to customer needs and expectations. They were very reactive. And the goal in this environment was mere customer satisfaction. However, at MetricNet, we believe that customer satisfaction is a losing proposition because it doesn't engender loyalty. It doesn't engender repeat business. It doesn't propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. And what you really need from your call center is customer enthusiasm, that is customers that want to do business with you, and product differentiation. regardless of what you're selling. It could be the biggest commodity product in the world, but you still have an opportunity to differentiate that product and service from those of the competition. So in this new paradigm, the call center is increasingly viewed as a source of value creation. Customer contact becomes a company differentiator and a product differentiator. And MetricNet's research shows out and bears out the fact that increasingly when customers make a decision to purchase a service or a product, increasingly the expectation of the quality of service that will come after the sale is factoring into that initial purchasing decision. 10 years ago, the expectation of service after the sale, after the fact that a product or service was sold, factored in only about 8 or 10% of the initial purchasing decision. Today, that number is almost 30%, which says that about 30% of the criteria that customers consider when they're making a decision about purchasing a product is done so with the expectation of the quality of service that comes after that initial sale. Increasingly, call centers are replacements for traditional brick-and-mortar facilities. The goal is to stay ahead of customer needs and expectations, to be proactive, not reactive, to be proactive and preventive and strategic, and to build customer enthusiasm, loyalty, positive word-of-mouth referrals, repeat business, and increased market share. This is the new paradigm that we're going to be talking about today. Now, more than a dozen years ago, I had a client send this comic to me. The comic reads, "Delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to?" Well, the reason, hopefully, is clear now, because customer satisfaction is not a winning proposition. If a customer is merely satisfied, it doesn't mean that they want to do business with you or are going to propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals or are going to be loyal to your business or service. Customer enthusiasm, customer delight, if you will, is what drives repeat business, growing market share, customer loyalty, and this is what we're after when we're talking about building a competitive advantage at the customer interface, at the customer contact call center. Now, what we have observed is that call centers tend to evolve through 3 stages. Call centers that are new or have not evolved very far tend to operate very reactively. We consider this the support stage. But at some point, a call center begins to realize that there's got to be a better way than simply being a slave to service levels and to constantly be behind the curve and trying to catch up with customer needs and expectations. And they begin to make investments in tools and technology. And they start transitioning to a more preventive and proactive and strategic model of delivering service to their customers. And eventually, those that are the most successful at making this evolution become what we call strategic stage call centers. These are the call centers that represent a source of competitive advantage for your company, where the product or service and the call center are 2 sides of the same coin. The product might be a commodity, but you can differentiate that commodity with exceptional service and support at the customer interface. And that's what we want to convey here today, as much as anything else, is how you make this transition from a support or a reactive stage call center to a transitional stage call center and ultimately to a strategic stage call center, where your call center will ultimately represent a source of competitive advantage for your organization. Sadly, only about 2/3 or only about 5% of call centers worldwide operate in this strategic paradigm. Another 1/3, roughly 30%, are going through the transitional stage, where they are making investments in tools and training and technology in an effort to become more strategic, more preventive, and more proactive. But sadly, nearly 2/3 or 65% of call centers worldwide still operate very reactively in this support stage. And again, as much as anything else this afternoon, what I want to talk about to you is how we make this evolution as quickly and effectively as possible. So let's transition now and talk a little bit about where the data came from that we're going to be talking about, the data and the observations. We've been at this for a long time now. I've spent most of my career doing benchmarking for call centers and service desks. And as a result of that, MetricNet now has the industry's largest database of call center process and performance indicators. We've got more than 3,000 call center benchmarks in the database. We track more than 30 KPIs, everything from first contact resolution rate and speed of answer to cost per contact and customer satisfaction. We also track nearly 80 industry best practices. These best practices address everything from call center strategy to human resource management to process and procedure, the call handling processes and procedures, to technology, performance measurement and management, and finally what we call stakeholder communication, which is about managing your message to key stakeholders within the organization. What I'm presenting today is the 90-minute version of what is otherwise a full-day seminar on call center best practices. So I realize I cover a lot of material. I talk fairly quickly, but I'm trying to cover a lot of ground to give you the biggest bang for the buck in the 90 minutes that you're here on this webcast. Now, the data from this database comes from a whole variety of call centers. I mentioned more than 3,000 benchmarks. And the industries cover all of the major standard industrial classifications. If you're familiar with the SIC codes, standard industrial classification codes, we've done benchmarking for all of the 3-digit SIC codes, everything from banks and financial services, telecommunications, healthcare, hospitality, meaning hotels, airlines, etc., insurance, manufacturing, retail, transportation, gas and electric, and energy utilities. But it's important to point out that the industry's best practices are largely independent of your vertical market. There's at least 80% commonality as you go from industry to industry. And I want to point this out because we are asked all the time by organizations that benchmark with us. They'll come from, say, gas and electric utilities, and they'll say, gee, we want to be benchmarked against other gas and electric utilities. But the reality is that's not where the best practices are. You've got to look at other vertical markets if you're interested in looking at industry best practices. So the best practices are largely independent of your vertical market. They're largely independent of the industry that you operate in. And it's important to recognize that because what we're going through today is largely independent of the industry that you're in. In other words, the best practices are largely applicable across industry barriers. Now, throughout the presentation, I'm going to use words like best-in-class and world-class somewhat interchangeably, but it does make sense to define what a world-class call center is right up front, since I do use this vernacular throughout the presentation. Let's start with the 4 components of what a world-class call center looks like. The first thing is that you consistently exceed customer expectations regardless of what kind of transaction it is. It might be an inbound customer service transaction. It might be an inbound or an outbound telemarketing transaction. It might be an outbound collections call. And yes, it is possible to exceed expectations on a collections call. But what you're after here are high levels of customer satisfaction. Specifically, you want to be in the top quartile for customer satisfaction among all call centers. But being high quality, having high customer satisfaction by itself is not enough. You also have to manage your business value at an acceptable level. And specifically, we look for your cost per contact to be below industry average levels, and specifically in the top quartile in terms of low cost. You could call that the bottom quartile, I suppose. But you want to see your cost well below industry average levels. And if you're a revenue-generating call center, for example, if you do collections or you do telemarketing and telesales, we like to see that revenue generated versus your industry peers, and this is where vertical markets do make a difference, is when you're talking about telemarketing and telesales revenue generation, we like to see that the revenue generated per agent per month is in the top quartile. Now we get a little bit more subjective. The third criteria is that you're following industry best practices, and the good news is that industry best practices are now pretty well defined and documented. In fact, what you're seeing here today, again, is a scaled-down version of MetricNet's full-day seminar on call center best practices. But those best practices are pretty well known. They're pretty well documented. And there should be no reason that your call center is not following those best practices, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to figure this out through trial and error. The best practices are out there to be had. And you can follow those and steadily improve your performance to ultimately achieve world-class levels of performance. The fourth criteria, and perhaps the most subjective, is that you want to be adding value on every transaction. And what this means is that the customer has a positive experience, it improves their loyalty to your product, to your brand, and it creates positive brand awareness and switching costs. In other words, the customer wants to continue doing business with you. They don't like the thought of doing business with another organization, in part because they like the quality of service that you're giving to them. Now, graphically, we can define a world-class call center this way. If I take a set of data from our benchmarking database, that's what these blue circles represent, and I put it on a two-dimensional chart where we've got cost per contact on the x-axis and customer satisfaction on the y-axis, we tend to get a distribution that looks like this. Now, clearly there's a correlation here between cost and quality. The reason I put cost on the x-axis is because cost is the independent variable. Typically, what happens is you're given a certain budget. There might be some negotiation around that budget, but the quality is the result of the budget that you have. In other words, you're resource constrained, and the quality is a fallout, if you will, from the budgetary constraints that you have. Very rarely do I find call centers where they establish a quality target up front and then fund it accordingly. It doesn't happen that way. Generally, there's a discussion and a negotiation around budget and resources, and then the quality is, well, the best quality you can get at that resourcing level. Now, you'll notice here that there clearly is a cause and effect relationship, and generally, as I mentioned, cost will drive customer satisfaction. But it's a nonlinear relationship. And as your quality improves, your cost increases disproportionately. Now, this is no surprise. This is true of almost any product or service, whether you're buying a car, buying a house, purchasing a seat on an airline. Generally, as the quality increases, the price increases or the cost increases disproportionately. And that's known as diminishing returns. It's a phenomenon that has been well documented for literally centuries. But here's the real point of this chart, is to indicate that being world-class is not a fixed definition. We get calls every day from call centers who want to know what speed of answer, what abandonment rate, what first call resolution rate, what cost per contact, and what customer satisfaction do I need to get to in order to prove that I'm a world-class call center. And the answer is it really depends upon what your resourcing level is. We've seen call centers that are funded, inbound customer support call centers that are funded, for example, at a very subsistence level. They'll be spending $3, maybe $4 per call, yet they still manage to eke out a pretty good level of customer satisfaction despite the fact that they are underfunded and under-resourced. By contrast, we have worked with call centers that will spend literally hundreds of dollars per inbound contact. And for that call center, we would expect a much greater absolute level of performance because they have more resources. We would expect them to have a lower abandonment rate, a quicker speed of answer, a higher first contact resolution rate, and of course, we would expect them to have a higher customer satisfaction. But I consider this call center down here spending $3 or $4 a call. If they manage to achieve the best possible result with the limited resources they have, that is an optimized call center. And we consider that to be a world-class call center, even though their absolute performance may be significantly below the call center that's spending $50 or $100 or even $200 per inbound contact. So it's important to recognize that there is no absolute definition of world-class performance. It is rather a relative definition. And the real question is this: are you using your limited resources in the best possible way so that you can achieve an optimal result in your call center? In other words, there's no wasted motion. You have optimized yourself. You've taken the limited resources you have, and you've deployed them in such a way that you achieve the best possible result. Now, it's helpful to understand this curve for a whole variety of reasons, some of which I've already talked about, but it's also helpful to understand where you are relatively speaking on this curve. If you're way up here in the upper right, in the flat area, what it says is that you can probably cut your costs a lot and not sacrifice much on customer satisfaction. By contrast, if you're way down here in the lower left, what it says is that you can probably improve your quality quite a bit without increasing your costs very much. That is why most call centers tend to operate in this mid-region here. So for an inbound customer service call center in North America, what that says is that the cost per contact generally ranges between $5 and $15 per inbound call. It's going to depend somewhat on your geography. It's going to depend somewhat on your handle time. But $5 to $15 is typically what we see for a cost per inbound contact for a customer service call center. But once again, we've seen that number go as high as more than $100 per inbound contact. We've seen it as low as $2 or $3 or even $4 per inbound contact. The real issue is, are you using your limited resources in the best possible way to achieve the best result you can given your limited resources? And that brings us to our first polling question of the day. And as you can imagine, that polling question has to do with the definition that I've just given you of what it means to be world-class. And the polling question is this: given the definitions that I've just provided of what it means to be a world-class call center, do you consider your call center to be world-class? While you're answering that question, one of the things I like to do is shout out to all of those who've dialed in from around the world. I want to thank all of you, first of all, for taking the time to participate in MetricNet's webcast today. Some of you are here in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. You're in the Western Hemisphere, but we've got a significant number who've dialed in from other time zones in Eastern Europe, in India, in Japan, New Zealand, Australia. the Philippines, and elsewhere. And I know it's the middle of the night your time, and I just want to give you a special shout out and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Just a few names here I'm picking randomly from those who are on the call. Clancy Ward, thanks for joining us today. Shelley Pollard, great to have you here. Terrence Bell, glad you could join us. Valerie Finley, great to see you. Will Woodhead, glad to have you. Okay, it looks like almost 90% of you have voted on this poll, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll down and then share the results with you. Okay, this is the best result we've ever had when doing this webcast. Based on the definition I've just given you, 40% believe that you are world-class. Normally that number's down around 25%, so kudos to you. If you've really achieved world-class performance in your call center, hats off to you. Another 48% have answered no, you don't believe that you're there yet. Let me offer some encouragement, which is this. It doesn't take a lot of resources. It doesn't have to take a lot of time in order to transition to being a world-class call center. And as much as anything else, what I want to convey today in our webcast is that the path is pretty well lit. The path to becoming world-class is pretty well lit. And I want to give you the tools, the insights, the data that you need to begin that journey and to ultimately achieve world-class performance in your call center. So thank you for taking that survey. We're going to move on now, and specifically we're going to begin a discussion on our model for industry best practices. Now, our model involves 4 components: performance measurement, diagnosis using benchmarking, prescription, which is action planning, and then the implementation of those actions so that you can realize some benefit within the organization. So it's a 4-part model. It's very synergistic, meaning that every component of the model reinforces and fortifies every other component of the model. But you'll note that the model is arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. Now, the model is very simple and straightforward, but it does follow the empirical evidence. So we haven't dumbed it down by any stretch of the imagination. We simply asked ourselves, based upon what we see in the industry, having done more than 3,000 benchmarks, what do we see the best in class have in common? What are they doing consistently the same way? And we were able to organize those best practices into these 4 categories. Now, let me give you a bit of a medical analogy here that will make this model perhaps come more alive to you. If you go to see a doctor, let's say you're not feeling well, or because you're going for an annual physical as an example, typically the first thing the doctor does is take some measurements. They're going to measure your temperature, your blood pressure. They might do some blood work. They might do an EKG, EEG. There's a whole lot of different measurements that they might perform. However, if the doctor says, well, gee, your temperature's high, your blood pressure's elevated, go home and get better, that doctor really hasn't done much for you. All they've done is given you some bad news and not told you what to do about it. So a good doctor is going to look at that information, look at those measurements, and diagnose what they mean. They're going to determine what they mean, and then they're going to develop a prescription. Not necessarily a prescription for drugs, although it could be that. It might be a prescription for a change in lifestyle. Sleep more, drink less, stop smoking, lose some weight. It might be a prescription for surgery. It might be a prescription. It could be a drug prescription. It could be a lot of different things, but ultimately it's up to you, the patient, to act on that information and that advice so that you can maintain your health and or improve your health over time. So by the same token, call centers go through this continuous process. Those that are good at it are continuously measuring their performance, using those measures diagnostically and prescriptively, and they are acting on that insight to steadily and continuously improve their performance. Now, we're going to start with a discussion of performance measurement. And I'll make a distinction here between 2 types of call center metrics. There are operational metrics. These are internally focused measures. You're familiar with a lot of them, like cost per contact, customer satisfaction, speed of answer. These tell you how you're performing as a call center. Now, by contrast, the business effectiveness metrics tend to be very externally focused. Oftentimes they're related to P&L, profit and loss, or revenue related. So if you're in a debt collections call center or you're in an inbound telemarketing telesales call center, oftentimes the business effectiveness metrics will be related to profit and loss. Typical metrics would be sales dollars per call center, full-time equivalent headcount per month, for example, collections dollars per call center FTE, operating expense divided by revenue generated. These are some fairly typical business effectiveness metrics. Now, we're going to talk first about the operational metrics, then we're going to discuss the business effectiveness metrics. What I've got here on page 24 are some pretty common operational metrics. There are about 20 metrics on this page, but there are literally hundreds of KPIs for the call center. So I don't want to lead you to believe that this is an all-inclusive list. We've organized these 20 metrics into cost, quality, productivity metrics, agent metrics, service level metrics, contact handling metrics. But this presents a dilemma, and the dilemma is this. Too often what we find is that call centers spend a lot of time measuring their performance, but they don't spend much time analyzing, evaluating that performance, and they spend even less time developing action plans, and as a result, you only get a trickle of action items that come out of all these measures. But as you can see from this red arrow here, the value increases as you move up this pyramid. This is the historical approach to performance measurement and management, and what we want to espouse today and talk about is the holistic approach to performance measurement and management, which de-emphasizes the measurement piece and emphasizes analysis, prescription, and action. So it has essentially taken this pyramid and turned it upside down and said, you don't need all these measures that I showed here on page 24. All you need is a small number of metrics, but you need to focus on the analysis and the action planning, and ultimately, you got to have the strength of your convictions to move forward and act on those metrics. Otherwise, you're not going to gain any benefit from them. So the short list of KPIs that really matter are shown here on page 26. Cost per contact and customer satisfaction are kind of the yin and yang of the call center. One of them measures efficiency, that's your cost per contact. One of them measures effectiveness, which is your customer satisfaction. And these metrics are in constant tension. There's no way to eliminate that tension. They pull in opposite directions, and that's not a bad thing because it does force you to make choices about how you're going to use your resources and how you're going to deploy your resources so that you get the best possible result. So we call these the foundation metrics. Also, in part, we call them that because viewed through the lens of cost and customer satisfaction, you can greatly simplify decision-making in the call center environment by recognizing that any decision you make should have the long-term effect of either reducing or containing your costs or improving the quality of the customer experience. I don't care if it's a decision on technology, headcount, process, training, or anything else. If in the long run, taking that action doesn't yield a lower cost or maintain the cost and or improve the quality of the customer experience, it isn't worth doing. Simple as that. Cost and quality is everything when it comes to delivering service and support. However, the underlying drivers of cost and quality are important to understand because they're the levers that you have at your disposal to achieve a lower cost or higher customer satisfaction. Agent utilization is the big driver of cost. These are labor-intensive functions. Typically 75% or more of your total cost is tied up in your personnel, your salaries, and your benefits, not just of your customer-facing agents, but also of your indirect personnel like supervisors, team leads, workforce schedulers, trainers, and QA/QC people. First contact resolution rate is the big driver of customer satisfaction for an inbound customer service call center. There are other drivers of customer satisfaction when you're in an outbound environment or when you're in a collections environment. But for inbound customer service, FCR, first contact resolution rate, is the big driver of customer satisfaction. We also include on the short list agent job satisfaction because this is a bellwether metric that has a secondary effect on just about every other KPI in the call center. So high levels of agent satisfaction are correlated with high levels of customer satisfaction. They are correlated with low levels of cost per contact. They're also inversely correlated with absenteeism and turnover, meaning that the higher the job satisfaction goes, the lower the turnover, the lower the absenteeism will be. Now, because in a call center you've got a lot of moving parts, and you can see some of them on this page here, it's important to have a single metric that tells us how we're performing. And that's where the balanced scorecard comes in. I'm going to show you momentarily how a balanced scorecard is constructed. So I'm going to show you two metrics here, cost versus quality, and I'm going to show you the balanced scorecard. And then we're going to get into a case study where we discuss the remainder of the metrics on our short list here. So let's talk about cost versus quality. On page 27, what I'm showing here is cost on the x-axis, very similar to a chart that I showed you earlier when we were looking at the definition of what it means to be world-class. But I've reversed the x-axis here, and I've shown lower cost on the right, higher cost on the left. On the y-axis, I've shown quality as measured by customer satisfaction. So we've got high quality as you move up the axis, lower quality as you move down the axis. Where you want to be here is in this upper right-hand quadrant. This is where you are both efficient, i.e. low cost, and effective, i.e. high quality. This is the holy grail of running a call center. If you're both low cost and high quality, that's where you want to be operating. Now, if you're in this lower right-hand quadrant, it says your costs are good, they're low, but your quality is also not very good. And over time, you need to figure out a way to move up and improve the quality of service that you offer. If you're in this upper left-hand quadrant, it says that your quality is good, but your costs are also on the high side, and what you need to do is figure out how to become more efficient and reduce your costs over time. Now, if you're in this lower left-hand quadrant, you've got the worst of everything. Your costs are high and your quality is low, and you need to be thinking about both dimensions. How do I reduce costs, become more efficient, and how do I improve the quality of service over time so that ultimately I can migrate into this upper right-hand quadrant? So think about yin and yang, foundation metrics, cost versus quality. They're in constant tension, but it is possible to work your way into this upper right-hand quadrant where your costs are low, quality is high, you are both efficient and effective when you are in that quadrant. Now, the balanced scorecard is a very elegant tool, a very simple but elegant tool that answers the question, how are we performing overall? How are we doing compared to how we were doing last year or last month or last quarter? Now, this is for an inbound customer service call center. You can create a similar scorecard for telemarketing, telesales by including some revenue metrics. You can do the same thing for a collections call center by including some collections metrics. But for the sake of example here, I've created a scorecard for an inbound customer service call center. And I've included 5 metrics in that scorecard. There's cost per contact, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, which drives cost per contact, agent job satisfaction, as I mentioned earlier. It has a secondary effect on just about every other metric in the call center. And I've got a service level metric, the percent of calls answered in 20 seconds. Now, I put a weighting on each one of those metrics. This is our judgment call based on which metrics we think are more important. You can see that we've overweighted cost and quality. They combined have 55% of the weight. We've done that because we do believe that they should be overweighted. We do believe that they are the 2 most important metrics. You can see that utilization has a little bit less weight, job satisfaction 15%, and then the service level metric, service levels, by the way, are not terribly important. I'm going to show you some data on that in a few minutes here. That only gets 10% of the total weight. Now, the next step in constructing your scorecard is to put some reasonable ranges in these 2 columns, third column and the fourth columns from the left. Generally, the right way to do this is to look at a benchmarking peer group, that is other call centers that do the same thing that you do, and look at what the worst performers are doing on each of these 5 metrics, and then look at what the best performers are doing on each of these 5 metrics. So for this particular peer group, the worst cost per contact was $7.55. The lowest cost per contact was $3.33. The lowest customer satisfaction was 75.7%. The best customer satisfaction was 91.2%. So ideally, the way you want to set up these ranges is by looking at a benchmarking peer group. If you don't do that, then my suggestion is just take a look at what you think are some reasonable ranges. What's the best you could, or the worst you could expect to achieve in each of these 5 metrics, and then what is the best you could possibly expect or hope to achieve in each of these 5 metrics. You then put your own performance in this column, third column from the right, and you calculate a metric score using this interpolation formula. We take the worst case in the peer group and we subtract your actual performance. That becomes the numerator of our ratio. The denominator of the ratio is just the range, worst case minus best case. And this metric score will range between 0 and 100%. The closer it is to 0, the closer you are to the worst case performance. And the closer it is to 100%, the closer you are to the best case. So this really measures the linear distance you've gone between the worst case and the best case. A higher number is better. All of these metric scores will range between 0 and 100%. Now, the final step in creating the balanced scorecard is to multiply your metric score by your metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each of the 5 metrics in the scorecard. And when you add those together, you come up with a single number. That number will range from 0 to 100%. Now, the first time you do this, it might not mean all that much. However, when you compare it to a benchmarking peer group, assuming that this is a legitimate peer group of call centers that are similar to you in scope of services offered, scale, meaning volume of contacts, complexity, and geography. Those are the 4 dimensions you have to get right to get a fair benchmarking comparison: is scope, scale, complexity, and geography. So here's that 77.4% that we just calculated. Here's a peer group of roughly 25 call centers. Company XYZ, our example here, ended up in 2nd place. They're doing pretty well. Their score of 77.4% was good. The average for this peer group is just under 50%, which when we do this algorithm for literally hundreds of call centers worldwide, we end up with a nice bell-shaped curve. With the average right at 50%, tails running off to the right above 60%, tails running off to the left below 40%. So it's a nice normal distribution. It's a bell-shaped curve. Typically, you're going to be in the first quartile if you're above 60%. You're going to be in the second quartile if you're between 50 and 60%. You'll be in the third quartile if you're between 40 and 50%. You'll be in the fourth quartile on overall performance if you're below 40%. But this tool is also a great way to track and trend your aggregate performance over time. This is data from 2012, a client of MetricNet's. They established a scorecard. They measured their performance every month, and you can see that although the performance did go up and down month in, month out, which is normal, there are call fluctuations, there are call spikes, there are seasonal trends, there are all sorts of things that can impact these metrics. But what you're looking for is, in the long run, is performance improving? And clearly you can see that the trend is in the right direction. In fact, the purple background here, that represents the trailing 12-month average on performance. So that's a real brief rundown of the operational metrics that are important in a call center. Let's talk now about business effectiveness metrics. These are really dependent upon the services you're offering. There really is no standard set of metrics. They're usually related to sales, customer retention, revenue generation or revenue recovery, in other words, collections. There's a lot of room for creativity here in defining these metrics. Now, what we found is that call centers that generate revenue, oftentimes these business effectiveness metrics will be weighted more heavily. They will trump operational effectiveness metrics. In other words, if a call center is generating good revenue from inbound or outbound sales or from collections, typically management will look the other way on the operational metrics. They won't care that much if the operational metrics are not real strong. And this really reflects a focus on revenue growth and recovery, but it does allow some sloppiness on the operational side of the call center. And then we've got what I would call crossover metrics that address both operational and business effectiveness. One metric, for example, that's quite common would be operating cost divided by revenue generated. So if your call center costs $10 million a year to operate and you generate $50 million in sales from that call center, your ratio of operating cost to revenue would be 20%, 10 million out of 50 million. Just to give you an idea of what some of these metrics might look like if you're in a credit card call center providing credit card customer support, metrics like cross-sell and upsell conversion rate. So a customer calls in and they've got the basic green credit card and you're trying to upsell them to the gold or the silver credit card, and that costs them $60 per year to upgrade to that credit card. Looking at the percentage of customers who call in and that you're able to cross-sell and upsell is a very common metric in the credit card industry. Also for customers who are behind on their credit card payment, the number of payment plans that are established is a common metric. If you're in a collections environment, ABS, average balance saved, so if you are given a portfolio of $1 million in behind payments, if you will, payments in arrears, and you recover $500,000 of that, then your ABS, your average balance saved, is going to be 50%, meaning that you recovered half of that outstanding debt. There's also a metric called promises kept. When you're in collections, you have to ask a customer to make a promise. The customer is going to say, I promise to send you $100 by this weekend, or I promise to make the mortgage payment by the end of next week. You try and get them to make these promises, and then you track the percentage of the promises kept. And surprisingly, there's a huge difference in the percentage of promises kept. The more skilled collections agents typically are in the 80 to 90% range on promises kept. Those that are not as good at this might only be in the 30 to 40% range in terms of customer promises kept on promises they make on paying, some of their outstanding, some or all of their outstanding debt. Now, if you work in a television, cable television call center, you're going to be scheduling appointments for your field service representatives, and you might be measured based upon the number of appointments you scheduled. Also, if a customer calls in and they just want to sign up for basic cable, you're of course encouraged to cross-sell and upsell, and so there's a metric called the product count. Someone calls in and they want to buy basic cable and that's all they buy. Well, the product count is 1 for that customer. But what if you sell them on internet service, you sell them on the sports channel, you sell them on home box office and a bunch of other stuff, and by the time they're done, the product count is up to 5 or 6. That's a very valuable metric. It gives you insight into which of your agents are able to upsell and cross-sell more effectively, and those agents that are able to generate a high product count for new accounts. So these are just some of the examples of business effectiveness metrics that you might find in a typical call center. If you're in a technical support call center, in other words, a service desk, one of the business effectiveness metrics is first level resolution. That's different from first contact resolution. First level resolution is a percentage of contacts resolved at level 1 within the service desk. The reason that's a business effectiveness metric is because it is a proxy for total cost of ownership in IT service and support, because every time you push a ticket out to a different level of support, like desktop support, the cost of resolution increases fairly dramatically. So that would be an example of a business effectiveness metric, first level resolution rate in a service desk, or a help desk as some people call it. I'm going to pause briefly and answer a few questions. If you have any questions at this point, please type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen. And I'll answer a few questions now, but I will stay on at the conclusion of the webcast to answer any questions that I don't answer right now. Okay, there's a question here from Lucky, and Lucky's question is, can I print the slides? At the conclusion of the webcast, Lucky, you'll have an opportunity to fill out an evaluation survey. It'll pop up on your screen as you exit the GoToWebinar. Just 3 questions, and if you answer those, we will send you a copy of today's presentation, and you can, of course, print those out. Question from KB, came in late. Is it possible to get a copy of the webinar? The answer is yes. Okay, I just answered that question. Okay, question from Virginia. What type of metrics would you use to measure an IT service center? Some of the metrics are very similar to what I'm presenting here, Virginia. You're going to have cost metrics like cost per inbound contact or cost per ticket. You're also going to have first level resolution rate, which is a cost metric. It's a proxy for total cost of ownership. You're going to look at cost per minute of inbound handle time. For service level metrics, you're going to look at typically average speed of answer and call abandonment rate. For productivity metrics, you're going to be looking at the number of tickets or inbound contacts handled per agent per month, and also agent utilization. You're also going to look at the percentage agents divided by total headcount. That is, agents in the service desk divided by total headcount in the service desk. That's a measure of managerial efficiency. A higher number there is better. We look at service level metrics. I mentioned those. We look at agent metrics such as absenteeism, new agent training hours, annual agent training hours. We look at agent occupancy, schedule adherence, and then we look at contact handling metrics such as inbound handle time and the percentage of contacts resolved through self-help, self-service. So that's just a real quick rundown. You can go to our website, go to the resource library, and you'll find a white paper there called the 7 Most Important KPIs for the Service Desk, and that will give you a pretty good primer on the metrics that are important in a technical support service desk. Question from Arlene, what kind of metrics would you consider most important for an NPO, a nonprofit organization? It really depends on what the call center is doing, Arlene. Are they doing outbound calls to get donations? Are they taking inbound service calls? If you could elaborate a little bit on what that NPO does, I can probably, and what the call center specifically does in the NPO, I can probably give you some deeper insight on that one. Okay, from Joseph, what are the ways to reduce average handle time in the healthcare call center? Sometimes you don't want to reduce the AHT because if you reduce AHT, there is sometimes a trade-off in first contact resolution rate. Sometimes there's a trade-off in the quality of service that you offer. So you need to be very careful about this question of reducing AHT. There's always a way to do it. The question is, what are you sacrificing, if anything, when you reduce your average handle time? I would suggest that if it does involve sacrificing quality of service as measured by customer satisfaction or first contact resolution rate, you don't want to do it that way. However, if you're reducing your handle times because your agents are becoming more effective and they're resolving problems and tickets and inbound contacts more quickly, that's a noble goal. And there are a variety of ways that you can achieve that. Some are related to technology, some are related to training. Just effective agent training can help to reduce the handle time. Establishing a performance target can help to reduce the handle time. But again, if you give them just that one target, AHT, they will meet the target, but they're going to sacrifice other things. So you got to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then technology, for example, having a remote diagnostic tool in a technical support environment. Tools like BombGuard, GoToAssist, LogMeIn enable you to reduce handle times, and knowledge management tools also enable you to reduce handle times. So it's a two-edged sword. Be careful about how you reduce your AHT, but if you get there through technology, if you get there through training, if you get there by establishing performance targets, that's a good thing. And then over time, as your agents mature, as the experience level goes from 12 months to 18 months to 24 months to 36 months, you would expect to see your AHT go down there as well. Okay, we've had quite a few questions typed in, And I don't want to take too much time right now, but I assure you that at the conclusion of the webcast, I will answer all remaining questions. So don't hesitate to type in any other questions that you might have right now. However, we need to move on in our discussion. And specifically, we're going to begin a discussion of diagnosis. And really, diagnosis, in a word, is all about benchmarking. If I can just get my page to turn here. Here we go. Most of you, in fact, all of you, I'm sure, have heard the term benchmarking. Many of you have done benchmarking. I know that because many of you are clients of MetricNet and you've done benchmarking with MetricNet. We're going to use a benchmarking case study to talk about some of the other KPIs and talk specifically about using KPIs diagnostically, that is to identify strength and weakness within the organization. Now, benchmarking, I'll just define this very, very quickly. I've written a book on it, and I'm not going to obviously read the book to you, but I want to give you the 1-minute overview and the 1-minute definition. Benchmarking involves comparing your call center to a comparable peer group, and I've already mentioned that in order to get a fair comparison group, you've got to be comparable on scope, scale, complexity, and geography. Now, the comparison by itself might be interesting, but the more valuable piece of benchmarking is to understand that when companies in your peer group are performing better than you, if they've got a lower AHT, a lower cost per contact, a higher customer satisfaction, a higher first contact resolution rate, more debt collections, more revenue generated per agent per month, you want to understand how they achieve that better result. Because if you understand what they're doing, you can selectively emulate them. You can adopt and adapt those practices so that you too can achieve that better result. You see, given enough time, any organization can improve and become world-class. The question is, how long is it going to take you? Benchmarking enables you to improve your performance not at an evolutionary pace through trial and error, through blood, sweat, and tears, through incremental improvement. Benchmarking enables you to bypass all the trials and tribulations associated with incremental and evolutionary improvement to improve your performance at a revolutionary pace by building upon the industry's proven best practices. That's the real value of benchmarking, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve incrementally. You don't have to improve through trial and error. You can build upon the industry's proven best practices and see a step change improvement in your performance. Now, earlier, I presented this chart as a way to talk about what it means to be world-class, but I'm presenting the same chart for a different reason now. I want to convey the idea that benchmarking enables an organization to move from some average level of performance to this best-in-class performance curve, this upper curve here. Now, they say there's no free lunch, and strictly speaking, from physics and the second law of thermodynamics, that is true. But when it comes to processes, which are never completely optimized, but particularly when it comes to a process that is far from optimized or sub-optimized, benchmarking is a tool to help you optimize that process. It allows you to reduce your cost and improve the quality of service at the same time. So there's where the free lunch comes in. Now, once you're optimized, there's no free lunch left. And if you want to improve your performance, you're going to see an increase in cost. If you want to cut your costs, you're going to see some sacrifice in the quality of service that you deliver. But benchmarking, make no mistake about it, enables you to move on both dimensions. It enables you to reduce your cost and improve your quality at the same time and ultimately operate on this upper curve where you are optimized. That brings us to our second and third polling questions of the day, and those polling questions, as you can imagine, have to do with benchmarking. The second polling question is, have you benchmarked your call center within the past year? Have you benchmarked your call center in the past year? And again, let me just shout out to some of the folks that are on the call today. It's great to have you here. Carol Main, glad you could join us. Judy Lipinski, glad you could join us. Rachel Bucknell, great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. Rick Davis, thanks for joining us. Sol Roland, great to see you here. Stephen Buckmiller, good to have you here. Okay, looks like we're up to about 80%. Please vote if you haven't weighed in on this poll yet. Have you benchmarked your call center in the past year? Okay, we're at past 90% now, which is always our goal on these surveys. We want to get people to 90% participation. So I'm going to share those results with you. Wow, okay, we've got a high-performance crowd here today because, first of all, when I asked who's world-class, the result was far greater than I've ever seen. It was in the 40 percentile range. This time around, 38% of you have benchmarked your call centers within the past year. That's an extraordinary result. Normally, that number is down around 25 to 30%. 52% of you have not benchmarked your call center within the past year. So we got 38% yes, 52% no. So let's that brings up our our third polling question of the day. It's related to benchmarking, and the polling question is this: do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? And you've got 5 choices here. Yes, you're planning to benchmark in the next 90 days. Yes, in the next 6 months. Yes, in the next year. No plans to benchmark, or not applicable if you're not affiliated with a call center. And I notice I can watch these results as they come in. We're past 50% now on the voting, so I'd encourage you to weigh in on this. And a significant number of you are planning to benchmark within the next 90 days, so I'm guessing that you might have an MBO or some goal to benchmark your call center by the end of the year. So please weigh in on our survey if you haven't yet. We're nearing 80% participation. We like to get past 90%. Are you planning to benchmark your call center in the future? You got 5 choices here, so let us know what you're planning to do when it comes to benchmarking going forward. Okay, I'm just about to shut this poll down, so if you haven't weighed in yet, please do so. Let us know if you plan to benchmark your call center within the next year. Okay. Let me close this poll down and share the results with you. We got a 96% participation rate. That's fantastic. Here are the results. Okay, 21% are planning to benchmark within the next 90 days. Now they're 24% in the next 6 months, 25% in the next year, and 19% don't have any plans to benchmark at this time. This is one of the best results I've seen. Only 19%, fewer than a fifth of you have no plans to benchmark at this time. That's very encouraging, and this is very much in line with what we saw on the prior page, where 38% of you have benchmarked your performance within the last year. And let me point out empirically that MetricNet has observed that call centers that benchmark their performance at least once a year, there's roughly a 1-to-1 correlation between call centers that benchmark once a year and call centers that achieve world-class levels of performance. So some call centers are world-class because they benchmark. In other words, they got there through benchmarking, and others benchmark because they are world-class. In other words, they got to be world-class through trial and error, and then they began benchmarking as a way to maintain that world-class level of performance. So for those of you who haven't benchmarked or are considering benchmarking here in the next 3, 6, 9, or 12 months, I want to encourage you to go through with those plans. I think you'll find that benchmarking is probably one of the single best investments you can make in your call center. It doesn't cost a lot of money, doesn't take a lot of time, but it has an extraordinary effect on a call center. It does enable you to see that step change improvement in your performance by leapfrogging ahead of the incrementalism that typifies most improvement initiatives within call centers, and improve your performance not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. So I'm going to go ahead and close that down, and we're going to move on now in our best practices discussion. I'm going to show you some benchmarking data. Now this is real data. It's from a technical support call center. And the first thing I do when I look at this data is I look at the 2 foundation metrics, cost per contact and customer satisfaction. And in both cases, we've got a red flag. Cost per contact is well above the peer group average. There were roughly 40 companies in this call center benchmark. Their cost per contact is on the high side, and their customer satisfaction is on the low side. So we've got 2 pretty serious red flags here, and we need to figure out what's going on. So we're going to go through a diagnostic here that's going to help us interpret this data and figure out why this call center is high cost and low quality, high cost, low levels of customer satisfaction, because we need to rectify that situation. So we start with our foundation metrics. Cost is largely driven by utilization. This is a labor-intensive function. And so the more effectively you utilize your human resources, the lower your costs are going to be. Likewise, first contact resolution rate is a big driver of customer satisfaction. Here's the data to prove it. As agent utilization increases, cost per contact comes down. Now, the slope here is roughly 1 to 2, meaning that it takes a 2 percentage point improvement in utilization to yield a 1 percentage point decrease in cost. The reason is that your agent salaries and benefits represent about 50% of the total cost in a call center. Now, if you look at all human resources, it's about 75% of your total cost. I'm talking about the supervisors, team leads, and all that. But if you just look at the agents, look at their salaries and benefits, it represents about 50% of the total cost. So it makes sense that it takes about a 2 percentage point increase in utilization to see a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. I've included in the presentation deck itself the formula for determining agent utilization, and I've included an example there as well. So if you're interested in calculating your utilization, you can do so. Worldwide, the average number is only about 50%. People are sometimes shocked, and they assume that, well, those call center agents, they must be goofing off half the time. Well, that's not true. But keep in mind, when we calculate agent utilization, we are not backing out sick days, vacation days. We're not backing out auxiliary time, training time, administrative time, We don't back any of that out. We measure everyone in our database exactly the same way because different companies have different leave policies, holiday policies, vacation policies, sick day policies, and the like, and we didn't want that to influence the utilization calculation, so we didn't back any of that stuff out. The denominator in this ratio is 9,760 minutes. The numerator in the ratio is the inbound and outbound contacts multiplied by their respective handle times, and worldwide the average is only about 50%. Here's the data that shows how FCR drives customer satisfaction. Here there's roughly a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that every 1 percentage point improvement in FCR yields an approximate 1 percentage point improvement in customer satisfaction. Let's look at service levels now. Here's average speed of answer versus cost per contact. Blue diamonds are data points. Red line is a linear regression through the data. And as you can see, as the ASA becomes more aggressive, the cost goes up. Now, if you've worked in workforce scheduling, you know why this is the case. If you reduce your ASA, say, from 50 seconds to 25 seconds, you have to staff up in order to answer the phones more quickly. And if you reduce it still further from 25 seconds to 10 seconds, say, you have to staff up still further. So naturally, as your ASA becomes more aggressive, your costs go up. The same thing is true of call abandonment rate. As you get more aggressive on call abandonment rate, the cost goes up. Blue diamonds, again, are data points. Red line is a linear regression. But here's the real kicker. Increasingly, customers understand that, or call centers, I should say, understand that what customers care about is first contact resolution rate, and service levels don't make much of a difference. And that's proven here on page 49, where we're showing ASA versus customer satisfaction. But I want to give you a caveat here. ASA is measured here as a percentage of handle time. So if you have a 5-minute handle time, 10% of that would be 30 seconds. And what this chart is saying, in effect, is that as long as your ASA is less than 5%, 10% of your handle time, you're going to be just fine. However, if you get too egregious and your ASA gets to be 12, 15, 20% of your handle time, then you're going to see a drop-off in customer satisfaction. That will happen. This is a nonlinear regression. It's an exponential regression. Again, blue diamonds are data points. Red line is a regression. So if you've got a handle time of 10 minutes, 10% of that is 1 minute. If you've got a handle time of 2 minutes, 10% of that is going to be 12 seconds. And all it says is that customers judge ASA based on their expectation of the total handle time for the transaction. That's why when you call 411, which I don't think anybody does anymore, but back when people used to call 411, the information number, you expected a 1 or 2 second answer speed because the whole transaction was only about 10 or 15 seconds long. By contrast, when you're calling a technical support service desk, it's not unusual for the handle times to be 15, 20, even 30 minutes. And so you're okay typically with a 2 or 3 minute speed of answer. So ASA is measured as a percentage of handle time. And what this chart says is that you don't want to get too aggressive on this because it doesn't buy you anything on customer satisfaction. The customer sat curve is flat here, but what you will be doing is increasing your costs. So why would you do that? The sweet spot on ASA is somewhere in the range of 7 to 9% of your handle time. So ASA in the 7 to 9% of handle time range is a sweet spot. Same thing is true of call abandonment rate. There's a sweet spot here somewhere in the range of 6 to 8% on abandonment rate. If you get too egregious and it gets out to 14, 15, 16%, you will see a drop-off in customer satisfaction, but there's no point getting much lower than 6 or 7% on call abandonment rate because it does nothing for customer satisfaction, but it does drive up your costs, as you can see here. So it's important to understand this particular point when it relates to service levels because historically in this industry, there's been an assumption that if you have aggressive service levels, your customers are going to be happy, and that's really not the case. Customers are willing to forgive you an occasional abandoned call or a long speed of answer. What they're not willing to forgive is incompetence as measured by a low first contact resolution rate. Let's look now at training hours. Is this just motherhood and apple pie? Everybody talks about it, but nobody really does it. Well, training hours have a big impact on first contact resolution rate. As the new agent training hours increase, so too does the FCR. As the annual agent hours increase, so too does the FCR. All these diamonds here on the y-axis, these are companies that provide no incremental training. In other words, they do initial training, but they don't do any ongoing training after their agents, even after they've been there for many years. But you can see as training improves, so too does FCR. FCR, we know, is a driver of customer satisfaction. Let's look now at agent satisfaction. You can see that as agent satisfaction goes up, so too does customer satisfaction. As agent satisfaction goes up, turnover goes down. Why would we care about that? Well, because turnover is expensive. In this industry, it costs about $10,000 to replace an agent. That's the cost of finding the person, recruiting the person, screening them, training them, and then it takes them some time before they become fully productive. You know, they've got to move down a learning curve. So on average, about $10,000 in North America to replace a person. So turnover is not a good thing. Not only is there a cost associated with it, but when a person leaves, you know, there's knowledge and expertise that goes out the door with them. So keeping the turnover down is a good idea. One way to do that is to manage agent morale / agent job satisfaction to help reduce the turnover and the absenteeism. And that brings us to our final polling question of the day. And as you can imagine, this polling question has to do with agent job satisfaction. And the question is this: do you track agent job satisfaction in your call center? You track agent job satisfaction. Okay, we're getting good participation here. We're over 60% already. Track agent job satisfaction. We're up to almost 80%, so please weigh in on this poll. All right, we're just at 90% now, so let me show you the results of that poll. 28% of you are tracking agent job satisfaction. 66% are not tracking agent job satisfaction. You can go to MetricNet's website and download an agent job satisfaction survey. If you're not doing it, it's pretty simple to perform. We recommend surveying your agents twice a year. If you can only do it once a year, that's acceptable. But it only takes the agents about 15 to 20 minutes to take the survey, and it's important to understand what they're thinking. You give them a free-form field in addition to 5 standard questions. You give them an open field to tell you whatever they want to tell you. You'll learn a lot by doing this, and you can start actively managing agent morale within the organization. But it starts with measuring agent job satisfaction. Okay, so for those who participated in that, thank you. We're going to move on now. We're going to look at training hours and how they impact agent job satisfaction. You can see that as agent training hours improve, so too does agent job satisfaction. So this isn't just motherhood and apple pie. This actually has a positive impact on agent job satisfaction, as you can see here. So now we can put this chart together, and we can look at the cause and effect relationship between the KPIs that matter most, which are the ones in red: the cost per contact, the agent utilization, the customer satisfaction, the first contact resolution rate. First level resolution rate really applies only in a technical support environment, but then we've got agent job satisfaction. The metric that's not shown on here is the balanced scorecard. But this cause and effect diagram is very important to understand because it puts a great deal of power in your hands. It allows you to understand what levers you can pull to achieve desired outcomes. If you want to improve CSAT, look first at first contact resolution rate. Look secondly at agent job satisfaction. If you're trying to improve your cost per contact, look at agent utilization first. Secondarily, look at your service levels, your speed of answer, and your abandonment rate. But this cause and effect diagram, this linkage, if you will, helps you understand how the KPIs are interconnected and interrelated. And it gives you a great deal of power, as I said, to pull the levers you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. Okay, so we're back to our technical support call center with high cost, low customer satisfaction. We know that one of the big drivers of cost is agent utilization, so let's look at that number. It's 46.7% for this service desk. The peer group's at 53%. Okay, so we've got a bit of a red flag there. Now, what drives utilization? Well, service levels. So let's look at the service levels. Their speed of answer is 18 seconds compared to 45 seconds for the peer group. Their abandonment rate is 2.9% compared to 8.1% for the peer group. Now, when I asked the service desk manager why they had an 18-second ASA and a 2.9% call abandonment rate, the answer was telling. He said the CIO told us to keep the ASA under 20 seconds and the abandonment rate under 3%. And then I said, why? And the answer was, well, he thinks that's going to drive high levels of customer satisfaction. So this is a classic case of believing that a low ASA and a low abandonment rate is going to drive high customer satisfaction. Clearly, that was not the case. The diagnosis was pretty simple. You've got too many FTEs here. You had to staff up to get to this 18-second ASA and this 3% abandonment rate. What you need to do is attrit over time. They needed to drop their headcount by 5 or 6 FTEs. Their turnover was at about 30%, just right in line with the peer group here. And so essentially what we said is, as you experience turnover, do not backfill on the next 5 or 6 individuals that attrit. And you will right size. You will see this ASA increase. You'll see this abandonment rate increase. You will see the utilization increase, and you'll see your cost per contact go down. And that's exactly what happened. Within less than 6 months, they did attrit. They dropped the headcount. They saw their ASA go up to around 30, I think it was 39 or 40 seconds. Their abandonment rate went up to around 5.5%, 6%. The important thing is their utilization went to 55%, and their cost per inbound contact went to $21. So pretty straightforward diagnosis, pretty straightforward remedy to fix the situation. What about customer satisfaction? Well, they're at 63%, quite a bit below the peer group. We know that the big driver of CSAT is FCR, so let's look at the first contact resolution rate. They're at 51.3%. Peer group's at 71.3%, so there's a pretty serious smoking gun. What is it that drives FCR? Well, we know that training has something to do with it, so let's see what their training looks like. New agent training hours, new agents get 36 hours of training compared to almost 80 hours for the peer group. Annually, agents get 12 hours of training compared to 34 hours for the peer group. So again, the diagnosis and the remedy was pretty straightforward here. We said you're just not investing enough in training. You need to train your agents a little bit more effectively. And here again, within about a 6-month period of time, they ramped this up to literally about 100 hours of new agent training. Annually, they provided, I think it was 30 or 40, I can't remember the exact number, of annual training for their agents. And lo and behold, this FCR went up to almost 75%, and their customer satisfaction within 6 months got to almost 85. It was around 84.5%. So if you understand the linkage between the KPIs and you're able to diagnose the strengths and weaknesses in the organization through benchmarking, this kind of exercise that we've gone through where we've diagnosed where the strengths and weaknesses are, and we've done a gap analysis to determine what drives the negative performance gaps, that's the key to identifying the improvement opportunities and then acting on those improvement opportunities. Let's move on now. We've talked about performance measurement. We've talked about benchmarking, using benchmarking as a tool to diagnose performance. These last 2 sections go fairly quickly, so rest assured we will finish on time at 3:30. We're now talking about prescription, that is action planning. And I've developed 4 charts here. The first one deals with performance measurement. The next one deals with human resources. The next one deals with contact handling practices. And then the next one deals with technology. Now, you've probably heard the paradigm people, process, technology. And the final 3 charts in this section are, in fact, about people, process, and technology. The underlying assumption or premise there is that you need to invest first in your people, your human resources, and then you invest in your processes, and then you invest in your technology. So technology becomes an enabler of the people and the process. The process becomes the enabler of the people, but it really is in that order. You invest first in people, then process, then technology. Well, we've been able to demonstrate that there's even a more fundamental building block, and that building block is the discipline of performance measurement and management. Because if you're weak here, if you don't have good KPIs, if you're not using your metrics diagnostically and prescriptively, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. And it doesn't matter how good your people, process, and technology are, you're just not going to have a good call center. And so a more fundamental building block is performance measurement and management. Now, I refer to these 4 pages as cheat sheets, and let me explain why. And I'll use human resources as an example here. You'll note that I've listed some industry best practices. This is not a complete list of HR best practices, but it lists some that are more commonly known and well understood. We've listed shorthand on the left column and then a broader description of the best practice in the second column from the left. For example, career pathing. Career paths have been formalized and documented. They often include vertical, meaning managerial, as well as lateral promotion opportunities. Performance levels required for advancement are clearly spelled out. Agents are encouraged to take charge of their own career and skills development. Okay, that's a best practice when it comes to human resource management in the call center is real career pathing. Now, up here in the upper right, I've got a section called the affected KPIs. You can see I've listed a whole bunch of performance metrics, cost per contact, customer satisfaction, utilization, FCR, etc. And I've also shown some as one broad category business effectiveness metrics. And the reason I've done that is because the operational metrics tend to move independently. The business effectiveness metrics tend to move together. Now, at the intersection of any one of these columns and rows, you will see a cell. The cell will either be white, light blue, or dark blue. Now, if you have white in the intersection between the affected KPI and the best practice, what it means is that there's little or no cause-effect relationship between that KPI and that best practice. If there's light blue in that intersection between the KPI and the best practice, what it says is that there's a weak cause and effect relationship between the best practice and the KPI. And if you have dark blue at the intersection of the KPI and the best practice, what it says is that there's a strong cause and effect relationship between this KPI and this best practice. So it's no surprise that training can help you improve your first contact resolution rate. What surprises some people is that just putting in place a performance standard on FCR oftentimes has the effect of boosting FCR. I saw this just recently with a call center client of ours in the insurance industry where their FCR was hovering at around 72%. They had no performance goal around FCR. And I said, look, put a goal in place of 80%. They ought to be able to achieve at least 80. That's the peer group average when we benchmark you. They put that goal in place, and lo and behold, in under a month, almost all their agents were above 80% on first contact resolution rate. It's amazing how just having a performance goal can have the effect of improving performance on a given KPI. So the reason I call these cheat sheets is because once you have done your diagnostic, i.e. your benchmark, then you need to develop action plans. And this set of 4 charts related to performance measurement, human resource management, call handling practices, and technology enable you to identify when I've got a gap in FCR or a business effectiveness metric, or my turnover is high, or my cost per call is on the high side, what can I do related to performance measurement and management that might help me reduce costs? What can I do related to human resource management that might help me reduce costs? How can contact handling practices help me improve call quality and handle time? How can technology allow me to reduce the handle time? That is how these charts are used, and this is the very core, if you will, the very essence of the best practices model. These 4 charts show you the cause and effect relationship between some of the better known industry best practices and some of the more important key performance indicators. We've got the operational performance metrics, the 6 listed here on the left, 7, sorry, and then on the far right we've got the business effectiveness metrics. Okay, let's move on now to the final section of our industry best practices model. Let's look at implementation. So far we've talked about performance measurement. Less is more. The 80-20 rule applies when it comes to KPIs. Diagnosis, in one word, benchmark annually. Prescription, pretty straightforward. Once you understand what drives a performance gap, once you understand this cause and effect relationship, and once you understand these charts and how the KPIs are related to industry best practices, you can take the actions that you need to create a succinct action plan that will enable you to improve your performance, close any negative performance gaps, and ultimately achieve world-class performance. But now we're talking about implementation. This is really where the rubber meets the road. Now, if you were around in the 1990s, like I was, you may recall that Nike had a whole series of commercials that went on for, most of the decade. It went on for many years, and the commercials were just do it. It would show a runner in the rain. It would show, a triathlete, swimming and riding a bike and doing a marathon. It would show a person running cross country. It would show athletes doing different things, and at the end it would always say, just do it, and then you would see a person run by wearing a pair of Nikes. Well, when it comes to taking action in your call center, I think this expression is very appropriate because at this point, we've spent time measuring, diagnosing, developing action plans, and at this point, you really just have to do it. Now, call center best practices is a very holistic discipline. Your near-term goal ought to be improved performance, but ultimately what you're after is the brass ring, the golden ring, world-class performance, but the key to getting there is to take action, to just do it. Now, what I've shown here on page 69 is a very simplified action plan. It's a real action plan that was put together by a client of MetricNet's a few years ago. They had one of the worst benchmarking performances we had ever seen. Their balance score, remember we went through that balance scorecard, their balance score was under 10%. They were by far the worst performer in their benchmarking peer group. But they were determined, and they said within 1 year we want to achieve world-class performance. I assured them that that was possible, but they had to kind of put their nose to the grindstone, knuckle down, and really make something happen. And this is the essence of their action plan. There were 8 items. They were going to start by documenting their call handling standards. They were going to put a balanced scorecard in place. They hadn't been doing customer surveys. They started doing that. They were going to put in place a formal agent career path. They started doing root cause analysis to determine what was driving their call volume. They put in place a set of agent performance standards. They rewrote their IVR, their interactive voice response unit menus. And then they put in place call monitoring using Verint Witness. You can see they started in February, and by December, they actually did follow this action plan. And their balance score went from under 10%, as I mentioned, to almost 76%. I mean, it was an extraordinary success. It didn't take that much time. I mean, in this particular case, it was about 11 months, and they were a basket case when they started. It didn't cost that much money. It took one person full-time spending about 30 not full-time, sorry, one person spending about 30 hours a month just chipping away at it. By the end of the year, they had achieved world-class performance as demonstrated by their benchmark. Another way you can think about your action plan and prioritize your action plan is to think about two dimensions, one being impact. How much impact will a given action item have on your call center, and how much will that action item cost? If I look at this, we've got, 10 action items. You can see them. Each circle represents an action item showing relative impact, relative cost, and the colors indicate level of urgency. The ones in red are more urgent than those that are in green. So I would clearly do action item number 1 before I did action item number 8 because it has a higher impact and a much, much lower cost. So you're going to go after number 1 first. That's why it's shown as number 1. Then you're going to go after number 2, number 3, etc. So putting your action items on a chart like this can help you prioritize things because you can't do everything at once. That's something that this particular call center learned early on. They tried to, tackle all 8 things at one time. Eventually they realized we got to space these things out a little bit, and that's really what a chart like this enables you to do, is prioritize based on the expected impact, the expected cost, and the relative urgency of each of your action items. Let's not forget that establishing performance goals is an important part of running a world-class organization. This is a way of driving accountability down to the individual agent level, so you can establish call center goals. This was a technical support call center. You can see that they established a goal of $21 cost per contact, 80% customer satisfaction, 60% on utilization, etc. But a call center is not a living, breathing entity. And so if you're going to see results from establishing performance goals, you have to drive the goal down to the individual agent level. So you have to hold your agents accountable for achieving a certain customer satisfaction level. You got to hold them accountable for a productivity metric. You got to hold them accountable for call quality and first contact resolution rate. Oftentimes these agent goals will be higher than the call center goals because you know that some of your agents probably aren't going to hit their goal, but you still overall want to hit your call center goal. But it is critically important not just to track and trend your performance and determine whether or not you've achieved goals, but it's important for accountability to drive these performance goals down to the individual agent level. And in so doing, many of our clients, in fact more than 50% of our call center customers now develop on a monthly basis an individual CSR, customer service rep scorecard. Now mechanically this works exactly like the scorecard that I presented earlier for the entire call center. This particular scorecard has 7 metrics in it. You can see inbound contacts handled, that's a productivity metric related to cost. Customer satisfaction, this assumes that you can track CSAT results back to an individual agent, looking at their utilization, their FCR, and then some subjective metrics like teamwork and initiative and mentoring. And although these are subjective, you can put them on a scale of 1 to 5. You can objectify it. And that's exactly what we've done here. Now the beauty of this scorecard when driven down to an individual CSR level is that it helps objectify the process of delivering feedback to those agents. You all know, you've all been on the receiving as well as the giving end of performance evaluations. And you know that oftentimes they're not very satisfying. Whether you're getting evaluated or delivering an evaluation, they tend to be very subjective. Hey, you're doing pretty well. I'd like to see you take a little bit more initiative. I think you can improve your customer satisfaction scores. They tend to be pretty soft and squishy, if you will. But the CSR scorecard takes all of that squishiness out of it, and it quantifies how each one of your agents are performing. Now this particular agent got 100% on their metric score for mentoring. They do a good job. They were given a score of 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. They're not doing so well when it comes to utilization. In other words, they're not terribly productive when it comes to their individual utilization. They're not handling enough inbound calls per month. And so this scorecard is a way of sitting down with each individual agent on a monthly or quarterly basis and giving very objective feedback and telling them how they can improve, specifically how they can improve their performance. Most of our clients go even further, and on a monthly basis they will rank every agent in the call center. They don't do this to embarrass anybody. In fact, they don't put names here. They just identify each agent by number. And so if you're agent number 17, you can look and say, okay, well, I've at least, improved over the last 6 months. So, my 6-month average was only 27.6% on this agent scorecard, and now I'm up at 43.7%. This, again, is not a way of embarrassing anybody. That's not the intent. What you want to do is help every agent understand how they're performing compared to other agents in the call center. And we all know that sometimes a person will be working in the call center and it's just not their calling. It's just not what they're meant to do. They're not good at it. They don't like it. And if that's the case, they're going to see low scores pretty consistently. And, if they attrit out, look at it and say, I just don't see this getting much better. I'm not really liking what I'm doing, so I think I'm going to move on, do something else. That's not a bad thing. When those that are underperforming make a decision that they're going to leave the call center, that's probably good for them, and it's probably good for the call center. So this has a variety of effects. It helps everyone understand how they're performing relative to all of your agents in the call center. And for those that are underperforming, it's a bit of a wake-up call. It says, get your act together, start performing at a higher level, or maybe it is time to look at a career switch. So let me summarize what we've talked about here today. We've discussed a four-part model. Our best practices model looks at performance measurement, and remember, there are both operational metrics as well as business effectiveness metrics. We've looked at diagnosis using benchmarking, we've looked at action planning, and we've looked at implementation, all arrayed around the central objective of driving customer enthusiasm. When it comes to performance measurement, you should be measuring on an ongoing basis. Recognize that there's a difference between operational metrics and business effectiveness metrics, but less is more. You don't need more than about 6 or 7 metrics, including the balanced scorecard, in order to effectively manage your call center. You should be benchmarking annually. As I mentioned earlier, there's a one-to-one correspondence between call centers that benchmark annually and call centers that are world-class. Select a peer group that is comparable in scope, scale, complexity, and geography. You can use the metrics that we've identified in this presentation. Look for performance gaps and determine what drives the underlying performance gap. That cause and effect diagram that I presented earlier of all the KPIs, that's particularly useful when it comes to diagnosing the underlying drivers of a performance gap. What you then want to do is develop an action plan based on your gap analysis and the call center best practices you've seen here today, the cheat sheets that I showed you, the 4 pages that go from performance measurement to people, process, and technology. You don't have to hit a home run on all your action items. Go for the low-hanging fruit. Hit some singles. That's okay. But do what's realistic in the near term. You should, however, expect positive results. Every action should have the effect of reducing costs or improving customer satisfaction or enhancing revenue if you're in a revenue production call center. If it doesn't have one or more of those 3 effects, it just isn't worth doing. You haven't achieved what you wanted to. Every action should yield either a reduction in cost or an improvement in the customer experience or an increase in call center revenue. Finally, implement your action plan, but build buy-in right up front, get stakeholders on board, assign ownership and accountability, watch your progress over time, look at the KPIs, but you should expect positive, measurable change. And I'm talking about in the near term. If you can't see positive, measurable change within 30 days, it might take much longer, 6 or 9 months to become world-class, but you should see some measurable change within the first 30 days. The bottom line on call center best practices is this. The call center is increasingly being managed as a strategic asset within the enterprise. It's one that can differentiate your products and services. It can drive loyalty and switching costs with your customers, and it can help you build a competitive advantage within your company. Now, strategic call centers have a number of success factors in common. They're viewed and managed strategically. They're viewed as a source of competitive advantage, not as a supplement to brick and mortar, not as an afterthought, not as a necessary evil. They're viewed as a great opportunity to differentiate your company's products and services. They understand what it means to be world-class. Remember our 4-part definition. They seek to add value on every transaction, thereby creating customer delight or customer enthusiasm. They use their metrics diagnostically and prescriptively. They benchmark annually. They invest in training, technician training, coaching, and career pathing. It's not just motherhood and apple pie to them. They actually walk the walk, not just talk the talk. But they also have a bias towards action. They're oriented towards continuous improvement. Now, in a minute, I'm going to get to the questions that are queued up, that have been typed into the dialog box, and I'm going to go through a Q&A session. But before I do that, I'd like to make a few closing remarks. There's a number of things that you can do here almost immediately to get some advantage out of what you've learned here today. First, I want to encourage all of you to take a look around our website at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of our website is we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our online content. I also want to encourage you to connect with us on social media, where we put out a pretty steady stream of information that call center professionals should find useful. In a copy of the presentation itself, I provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Don't forget to register for our upcoming webcast. The next one will be in January. That's on Service Desk Best Practices. Then in February 2015, we're going to address desktop support best practices. We've got these scheduled all the way out through June. Not on this page, but you'll see when you go to our website, the webcasts are scheduled all the way out to June. I'd encourage you to go to our resource library, browse through the resource library, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, magazine articles, and recorded webcasts on call center metrics and best practices. And for those who are interested in benchmarking, we offer 3 different alternatives depending upon the level of granularity you need in your benchmarking data and your budgetary constraints. For those interested in continuous improvement, MetricNet offers the 1-year path to world-class performance. Now, you can reach MetricNet in the United States at this phone number, 703-992-7559. You can also email us at info@metricnet.com, or on our website you'll find forums all over the place where you can get in touch with us. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few minutes, I will be answering any questions you typed into the dialog box during the webcast. And for those who have to exit the webcast at this time, I just want to thank you again for attending the session. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please don't forget to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. Once again, this is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Let me open up the questions, and I'll answer questions as long as you continue to have questions here this afternoon. Okay. All right. Let's get back to where I left off before. Okay, there's a question from Gail, and the question is, cost per work order. How do you find the best practice number? Gail, it depends upon what those work orders are and what you're doing. If you're in a technical support environment, a work order might be a move add change for a user in your company. If you're in a shipping and receiving environment, a work order might be getting a pallet out the door. It's really going to be dependent upon the functional area, the vertical industry that you're in. And if you want to elaborate on that for me, tell me a little bit more specifically about the kind of work orders you're handling. I can probably give you more guidance here in terms of how you might find a benchmark for the cost per work order. Okay. Let's see. Oh, you did indicate here it's for service calls. How do you find? Let's see. Service calls. But once again, I don't know what kind of service you're talking about. I'm not sure if you're talking about move add change in an IT environment. I'm not sure if you're talking about package delivery. There's a whole lot of different things. So if you can elaborate for me, I can perhaps give you more guidance on that. Okay, from Raul, how do you measure agent job satisfaction? Raul, you can go to our website, go to the resource library, and there's a survey there that you can download. There's 5 questions. It's in Excel format. And you can administer that through any online tool like SurveyMonkey, or just send the Excel spreadsheet out to all of your agents and ask them to fill it out and send it back to you, and you can compile the results that way. But essentially, we look at a variety of things. We look at we have a question in there about career path. Do you feel like the career path is adequate? Scale of 1 to 5. 5 says yes, 0 or 1 says no. We ask about training. Do you feel like the training is adequate? We ask about the quality of the human resources environment. Do you feel like you get enough support from your supervisors, your team leads, and your coworkers? But the most important question is, overall, how would you rank your satisfaction with this job? Scale of 1 to 5. That's the most important one, and that is the one that, when aggregated for all the agents that work in the call center, is going to become the basis for your agent job satisfaction. Once again, I would encourage you to include an open form question on your survey to give every agent an opportunity to give you some feedback that doesn't fit into a 1 to 5 scale. They might want to tell you something about training, about workforce scheduling, about the rewards and recognition. So it's important to have that in the survey instrument itself. Once again, you should be able to find that on our website in the resource library. You'll be able to find a copy of an agent job satisfaction survey. Okay, Arlene elaborated for me here. Let me go back to your original question, Arlene. What kind of metrics would you consider for an NPO? And then you elaborated inbound, outbound email, social media, etc. Well, the metrics are going to be very similar to what you've seen here, Arlene. You're going to be looking at speed of answer, call abandonment rate, average handle time, customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate. Those are the kind of metrics that you're going to want to look at. But it's not clear to me whether or not you're trying to also generate revenue in this call center. So many of the metrics for an inbound customer service call center are going to apply in this environment. For outbound, there's a slightly different set of metrics. For email, it's sometimes harder to measure work time per email, but you have to make your best effort. You have to estimate sometimes the work time per email. But most of the metrics that I've gone through here today, the operational effectiveness metrics, are in fact metrics that are going to apply in your MPO environment for inbound, outbound, email, and social media. Okay, question here from Judy. We currently have a call center in an FQHC environment that schedules appointments for 5 sites. The same resources also answer calls and transfer them across the organization. Do you recommend that we separate the 2 functions? Let me think about this. You schedule appointments and you also answer calls. Not necessarily, Judy. The danger, if you separate those queues and the resulting queues are too small, what you do is you create diseconomies of scale. So let's just say, I'm going to make up a number now. Let's say you have 20 people working in your call center. Let's say you divide them up into a scheduling group and answer the calls group, a group that actually provides service. Okay, so we've got 10 in each queue. Suddenly we've lost the scale effect of having 20 people. When you have 20 people in a call center, you get a scale benefit that you don't get in a 10-person call center. So my caution would be very careful about dividing those queues, because what you may be doing is introducing diseconomies of scale and increasing your cost for both queues. But it doesn't strike me, although they are very different functions, scheduling appointments and answering questions are very different functions. There's no reason an agent can't be able to do both. I mean, we have clients that work in organizations that are expected to provide everything from complex, answer complex SAP questions in an IT environment to questions about the landscaping and the lighting in the parking lot, all sorts of things. What you're describing here does not strike me as being terribly complex. They are different types of transactions, but they're not so complex that it makes sense to split them up. So my suggestion would be think real hard before you do that, because you are going to reduce your scale economies and perhaps introduce some diseconomies of scale and see your costs go up. Okay, from Robert. How does this translate into government model? We've been struggling with implementing this profit model into the classroom and school environment. It translates very well into the government environment. I guess I'm not understanding the question. It says implementing a profit model. If we substitute the word efficiency for profit, implement an efficiency model into the classroom and school environment, there's no reason you can't do that. You may not be generating revenue, you may not be earning a profit, but you can certainly do this efficiently. And we get this question a lot from state, local, and federal governments who say, all this stuff that works in the commercial environment doesn't work in this environment. That's just an excuse. That's not true at all. We've seen some outstanding federal government call centers as well as state and local government call centers that follow the best practices that we've gone through here today, and they have achieved world-class levels of performance. So don't let this government mantra hobble you. It shouldn't hobble you unless you've got bureaucrats that are preventing you from adopting industry best practices. But typically you're not going to actually earn a profit, so let's substitute the word profit for efficiency and figure out how you can create or drive the most efficient behavior you can within your call center. There's no reason that being a government call center should prevent you from doing that. Okay, question from Imran. What are the best practices to reduce burnout and increase employee satisfaction without increasing cost? And the number one thing you can do is have a contact center manager that knows how to manage agent morale. You may recall back on page, 60 or 70, somewhere back in this presentation, when I showed the cause and effect diagram of the KPIs, that the big 3 drivers of agent job satisfaction are training, coaching, and career pathing. So if the agents get enough training and it's effective training, if they get enough coaching and it's effective coaching, and they get adequate training, you can manage, those are the 3 levers that drive agent job satisfaction, and you can manage that agent job satisfaction at a very high level. But I'm well aware of the fact that agent job satisfaction or burnout and low morale are at epidemic proportions in this industry. And it's because too many call center managers don't realize that they do have control over morale. They do have control over agent job satisfaction. And the three levers that I just mentioned, training, coaching, and career pathing, are the three levers that you can pull to improve job satisfaction and improve morale over time. And when I go in and do a benchmark of a call center, the first thing I want to know is that call center manager maintaining the agent morale at a high level? Because if they're doing that, everything else almost takes care of itself. In a high morale environment, high job satisfaction environment, we see lower turnover, we see lower absenteeism, we see lower handle times, hence lower cost per call, and we see higher customer satisfaction. So it's very critical to recognize that this metric it's important, it's a bellwether metric, it has a ripple effect throughout the organization, and it can be managed. Okay, a question from Virginia. How much longer is this training? Can I have a copy of the survey? Okay, I guess it was almost 3 o'clock when you asked that question. You know the answer now. It lasted until 3:30, and yes, you can have a copy of the presentation. Just fill out the survey. When you leave the webcast, a survey will pop up, and fill it out, and we'll send you a copy of today's presentation. I will also send you a link to the recorded session. Okay. From Imran again, how to strike a balance between quality and quantity. I think you mean quality and cost. I think that's probably what you're saying, Imran. They pull in opposite directions. Cost and quality pull in opposite directions. I actually just did a presentation on this at a conference called Fusion. I would encourage you to go to our website, go to our resource library, look up Fusion 14, and you'll find a presentation called Cost versus Quality, Striking the Appropriate Balance. And you'll see about 60 slides there that talk about how you strike the right balance between the cost of service delivery and the quality of service. Okay, let's see, Angela Kim. Okay, she wanted to let me know she was here as well. I guess she was disappointed that I didn't call out her name. Thanks for coming, Angela. Great to see you here. Okay, another question from Virginia. I've got to leave. Okay, could you please make sure I get a copy? Yes, I'll make sure. Anna, how do you measure cost per contact? Anna, the way we measure cost per contact is that we look at salaries and benefits for all the human resources that work in the call center. This includes the agents as well as the non-agents. The non-agents would be supervisors, team leads, QA, QC, training, and workforce scheduling people. So we look at all the human resource salaries and benefits, and we add to that the telecommunication cost, the technology expense, the licensing fees for whatever software and hardware you're using. We look at the cost of the space you occupy, and you should be able to get that from your facilities department. They usually have a cost per square footage for the space you occupy. We call it the facilities overhead. And then you look at travel, training, office supplies, and then any other expenses you have. So we look at all costs, and we divide it by all inbound contacts. So it's important to have a fully loaded cost, not just looking at your agent salaries and benefits, not just looking at the personnel salaries and benefits. You need to add on the associated overhead. But it is true that about 75% of the total cost is tied up in your human resources, but we believe that it's important, and to measure it properly, you want to add the other components I mentioned: telecommunications cost, technology expense, your facilities costs, your travel, your training, your office supplies, and then a catch-all category called other, which is usually pretty small. So you take all your costs, divide them by your average monthly inbound or your average annual inbound contact volume. Okay, question from Gail, FM calls. We service our customers through multiple CMMSs, work order creation, follow-up, and dispatch from customers, internal and external. Okay, Gail had the question earlier about the cost per work order. Still can't answer the question, Gail, because I don't know how much back and forth there is. I don't know if there's multiple outbounds for every inbound. In other words, a ticket gets submitted and you call the customer and email the customer multiple times. Here's what I would suggest is that if you send me an email, info@metricnet.com, we can schedule a few minutes on the phone, and I can drill down and zero in more on what your work orders are and give you a better answer than I've been able to give you so far. Okay, question from Ron. Does incentives work well in the call center? Does it always have to be money? Incentives can work well if they're properly designed. It doesn't always have to be money. I mean, that's what gamification is all about. Those of you who have worked in this industry for any time at all know that gamification is a huge trend in this industry, and the whole idea is to turn the call center environment into a game. There are hourly games, daily games, weekly games, monthly games, and the game might be, every team in the call center has a game today to see who can get to the best first contact resolution rate, or who can get to the lowest average handle time, or something like that. So gamification does generally represent non-monetary rewards, and it is meant to be a form of incentive. incentives do work well in the service center. You mentioned service center, so I assume you mean a technical support center, but whether it's technical support or just customer service call center, incentives, when properly designed, can work well. Of course, agents appreciate monetary incentives as well, and there should be some monetary incentive upside. There should be some opportunity to earn monetary incentives, but it doesn't have to be the entire incentive. In other words, the incentive doesn't have to be just monetary. In fact, we believe that the majority of incentives should be non-monetary, and those non-monetary incentives can be a whole host of things. They can be time off from work. It could be a shopping spree in the company canteen. It could be a casual dress day. It could be, movie tickets. It could be mall gift certificates, which are a form of monetary compensation, I suppose. Could be a lot of different things, but it doesn't necessarily have to be money. Our suggestion is when you look at incentives, roughly 1/3 monetary, 2/3 non-monetary. Gamification addresses that 2/3 that's non-monetary. You don't have to gamify fully in order to take advantage of non-monetary incentives. But I'm just pointing out that one of the mega trends in the industry is around incentives, and it's not around monetary incentives. It's around non-monetary incentives. Okay, I'm at the end of the questions, so if you have any other questions, please type them in. If not, then we'll conclude our webcast here briefly. Looks like there are no more questions. So let me just thank all of you once again for participating in today's webcast. It was a real pleasure and an honor to have you here today. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to send them to info@metricnet.com. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast, because this is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. Thank you once again for your time. I genuinely enjoyed being here with you today. This concludes our webcast. Goodbye now.